Welcome back, guys, to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, today on Tuesday, January 7th, a day after a pretty dark day in the NFL, usually where the regular season ends, and if you're not in that group that makes the postseason, usually you get a lot of news like we've seen yesterday and heading into today. So with that being said, we're going to start off today's show by talking about all the coaching changes, a little bit of the rumors, but I'll save that for tomorrow's show, kind of speculating a little bit more, but getting through all the latest firings and some coaching positions that might be safe and all that sort of stuff that we already know up until this point. Then, I didn't get a chance to go over some of the games that we saw on the weekend, so we're going to do a lot of that today, talking about the Broncos' big win, the Buccaneers' big comeback win, and also the Falcons and the Chargers in there as well. So make sure to stick around for all of that. But before we get started, a reminder to you guys, if you guys were unaware and you guys want to get involved with the show through any question, opinion, or just anything that's on your mind, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and your contributions in any which way possible to the show are always a great thing for these live shows, and we thrive on your energy and insight. So again, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and it gets featured on the show and also that I'm able to read it, there's an easy way to do that now just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat. In this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air. I'll be able to read it and, read it out loud and then get your guys' thoughts, perspective on anything we talk about on these live shows or just really anything that's on your mind. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box and let us know what's on your mind. Let us know what gripe, what curiosity you might have. Anything really benefits the live show. So go ahead and do that at any point during these shows. But with that now out of the way, like I mentioned, we're going to get to all the coaching news that we've already seen here so far in the NFL. Now that the regular season's done and dusted, the majority of the league is already thinking ahead. They're already thinking to new head coaching positions, maybe new general managers, who they're going to draft in this upcoming year's NFL draft. All that sort of stuff is just going to build over the next couple of months, right? But it all starts with making some of those hard decisions and changes that, are hard, because obviously, in perspective, people are losing their jobs, and you never want to see that, obviously, but there's been already a lot of news regarding a lot of these head coaching spots and who could end up where based on who's already left. So we're going to start off with the positions that have already been decided, right? Who's been fired so far to this point. Earlier today, I didn't write this down on my sheet, but it became breaking news earlier today that the Tennessee Titans fired their general manager, Ran Carthon. After 2 seasons with the Titans and a 9-25 record, they decided to part ways with him. And also, even more recent, the Las Vegas Raiders decided to fire their head coach, Antonio Pierce, after his first season as the real head coach, because that first half year, he was the interim head coach, but this past year, he got the full-time gig. It only lasts 1 year. The Raiders made the decision today to fire him, although they are going to keep going with their current general manager, Tom Telesco. Usually some people thought that Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco would be out the door simultaneously, but it looks like Tom Telesco has saved himself, and it really only looks like Antonio Pierce will be the only one departing from Las Vegas. So those are the 2 earliest ones. And elsewhere, some that have already been announced, starting from yesterday. The Jaguars fired Doug Pederson yesterday. The Patriots, obviously, we talked about firing Gerard Mayo. Surprisingly, the Seahawks fired their offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, in his first year after a very successful year at the college level at the University of Washington. He came over to Seattle, for the Seahawks, and I thought he did a pretty decent job, but unfortunately for him, the Seahawks, thought differently, and they fired him yesterday as well. In the same sort of realm here with offensive coordinators, the Cleveland Browns also fired their offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, who, if you guys remember, previously was with the Buffalo Bills. He came over to Cleveland, and the offense wasn't great. So, based on the results and everything like that, and I'm going to get into it a little bit more in just a little bit, but Ken Dorsey is the one that ultimately pays the price for how bad the offense was and the struggles, mainly on that offensive side of the ball, but also their offensive line coach, Andy Dickerson, was also fired along with Ken Dorsey. Then the Cincinnati Bengals fired their defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, and the Colts also fired their defensive coordinator, Gus Bradley. So those are the guys, pretty much all the pieces of news that have been decided already. Now, going into the ones that are safe, because we've seen these organizations in a pretty unprecedented sort of way make a statement that they're keeping these guys. Usually in the past, you don't really see it that much, like organizations coming out and kind of reassuring everybody that they're going to be keeping their head coach or their general manager. But this season, we've had the Giants, the Colts, the Dolphins, and the Jaguars come out and say that they're going to be keeping, their general managers or their head coaches. So the Giants were really one of the first ones to do it. Their owner, John Mara, stated in an official announcement that he is going to keep general manager Joe Schoen and head coach Brian Daboll for the upcoming season. There was some speculation that maybe one of them could go, more likely than not Brian Daboll. He was the one on more of the outside part of, this whole situation rather than Joe Schoen. But in the end, John Mara decided to keep both of them, trying not to shake up the organization too much and completely restart again. He figured it was the best case scenario for this team where they are right now to have the same sort of leadership going into next year. Then, similarly, the Indianapolis Colts and their owner, Jim Irsay, also reassured that their general manager, Chris Ballard, and their head coach, Shane Steichen, would also be returning in 2025. So that might have come at some of the displeasure for some of the fan base, considering the frustrations that were building up in the fan base. And I think it's become one of the louder ones for the Colts that I think I've seen in recent years. Usually it's not such like a big fuss about, their general manager, Chris Ballard, who has been there for a little bit now. And, Shane Steichen, the pressure's definitely mounting, but I didn't think that he would be one that I'd be thinking would be leaving the Indianapolis Colts. So that was a decision that I felt pretty on board with, for sure. I didn't think the Colts really needed to get rid of them, so I was all for that decision. The Miami Dolphins, similarly, their owner, Stephen Ross, also said that their general manager, Chris Grier, and their head coach, Mike McDaniel, will also be returning next year as well. Again, not a real big problem with that. I didn't have too much of a problem with Mike McDaniel or Chris Grier this season. I thought most of their problems were on the field, so I know the head coach has a lot to do with that, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, at least for one more year. And then the Jacksonville Jaguars, surprisingly, they kept their general manager, Trent Baalke, in a weird way, because Doug Pederson was fired, and a lot of people from the reports I've been seeing felt that Trent Baalke should have also, been fired, right? A lot of people thought that was going to be the expectation, but their owner, Shad Khan, decided to keep him. And it was a really awkward moment. If you guys saw it, I saw it on social media where the owner, Shad Khan, was basically in a Zoom call with a couple media members, and they asked him a question along the lines of, what would you do in a scenario where maybe your new head coach wants to work with a different GM? What would you do then? And basically he said that whatever that new head coach wanted, that he would ultimately agree with, and if he wanted the general manager fired, he would side with him, all while Trent Baalke, who kept his job, was also in that Zoom call. So very awkward moment there for it to just kind of play out like that. But for right now, Trent Baalke is going to keep his job in Jacksonville. So those are all the guys that look to be safe, barring any major changes around the coaching, tree in the NFL. And then there's a couple guys, or really one guy now, in Mike McCarthy, who there is a lot of speculation around, but there isn't anything real concrete about whether he's going to leave or whether he's going to stay. Jerry Jones has kind of been you know, has been as indeterminate, as confusing as maybe he usually is, with all season looking like he's going to move on from Mike McCarthy, but then in recent weeks not giving off that impression, so to say. So who knows? Maybe they end up keeping him. If I'm Mike McCarthy, I just think it's time for a split. I think it's time to get something new in there. I can't have Jerry Jones coming back as the owner and general manager. I can't have Stephen Jones in there as well. I can't have Mike McCarthy back in there. Dak, Micah, CeeDee, whoever they have at running back, it's going to be the same thing. I know they're going to be healthier, but it doesn't fill me with so much optimism. So something's got to change there, and I think it's time for Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys to just go their separate ways. And if I'm Mike McCarthy, honestly, with some of the connections elsewhere, some interest from other teams, I think it's time, if I'm Mike McCarthy, for me to just leave. I think that would be the best for my career. Again, if I was Mike McCarthy. And then just my thoughts on some of these other moves. I was surprised by Ryan Grubb, like I kind of started off by saying, because his offense, one of the biggest benefactors of his offense was Jackson Smith-Njigba, who had a Pro Bowl caliber season. Although he didn't make it, he really broke through this year. And I thought their offense, while it was a little hit or miss sometimes, the offensive line wasn't great. Say what you want about Geno, they put up a decent amount of points, more points than a good amount of the NFL this year, and they were in a lot of close games, and I didn't think, looking at them, that their offense needed some new play calling or anything like that. So I was pretty surprised by that, pretty confused, if I'm being honest. So I don't know what led to that. And for the Bengals, even a little bit, not as much, just because obviously the defense was the biggest part of it, right? And Lou Anarumo was the coach of that unit. But as it went on, it kind of looked like they were turning a corner. I mean, they played pretty decently this past week against the Steelers. Maybe not saying much because the Steelers are on a downfall, but I don't know. I felt like, from how people were talking about them and the way that I just felt like it was more of a personnel sort of thing rather than the coaching, I thought that they were at least going to give him one more chance, maybe really attack the positions of needs on that side of the ball, and then give Lou Anarumo another chance. But clearly, they decided to not go that way, and they fired him. And the last one I'll say is about Ken Dorsey. I kind of mentioned it before, but to fire Ken Dorsey, I feel like a lot of it, like Lou Anarumo, like who else has been fired? Like, I guess Antonio Pierce, in a sense. When you fire a guy like that, you immediately think that their side of the ball, if you're a coordinator, right, is the problem, right? Ryan Grubb, Lou Anarumo, like I mentioned, if they're getting fired, you think, oh, the defense was bad, like the Bengals defense was. So you can kind of logistically understand that decision. But for Ken Dorsey to be fired, a good amount of the season, Kevin Stefanski was calling the plays, right? He was the one calling the offense, and the offense really was struggling the entire year, not just when Ken Dorsey took over. I mean, at that point, I was at a spot where you really couldn't save it, and the majority of it also was on Deshaun Watson, if we're being honest, not living up to the expectations that they had for him coming in. So for them to fire Ken Dorsey and kind of make it look like, all the offense was on him, when Kevin Stefanski was calling it for the majority of the season before he turned it over to Ken Dorsey, I thought that one also wasn't very, not fair, because, nothing's really fair, right, when it comes to these things, but it just wasn't one that I would have personally made. Again, I probably would have given him another year, and maybe you draft the quarterback, second overall, that's always a possibility, or you go out and sign like a free agent or something like that and see what you do with somebody else, maybe outside of Deshaun Watson, not just because of his struggles, but because of his rehab, and it kind of taking a step back a little bit. He might miss a good amount of time in 2025. So I would have given him the opportunity to maybe work with somebody else, and then you really get an understanding from that point. But now that's out the window, now that he's fired, so they're going to have to get a new voice in there. And I'd imagine Kevin Stefanski is going to go back to calling the plays, but who knows? Maybe they find another voice out there. But for right now, that's all the news around all the head coaching, positions and news that we have going on so far. So with that being said, we're going to go back to the weekend and start recapping a little bit of these games. Starting off with the Buccaneers win over the New Orleans Saints. They clinched the division for the 4th year in a row, and also Mike Evans wrote his name in the history books as well. Find out more about that game when we return after this break.